Hello, colleagues. I'm Sister Kati McMahon, and I am the Special Assistant to the President for Mission and Planning at Gwynedd-Mercy College. And it is my delight to begin this series and to welcome you to Gwynedd-Mercy College, one of the distinguished institutions that comprise the Conference for Mercy Higher Education. No matter our position here, whether we are faculty, staff, or administrators, we each have a role to play, helping to develop what we call the distinctive Mercy graduate, a phrase you will hear over and over because it describes the desired outcome of our overall educational mission. What we mean by this is women and men who have a strong foundation in liberal learning, who are prepared to be professionally competent in their fields of study, and who possess a commitment to the Mercy heritage of service to society. They will become women and men prepared to have not only successful careers, but also live lives of deep meaning. Mercy is the value added to our educational mission, and we can only prepare distinctive Mercy graduates if the faculty and staff are also distinctively Mercy. I would suggest to you that it involves the same intentional academic preparation to be a Mercy educator as it is to be an excellent teacher of any specific discipline. And even more significantly, it's what you do every day. It's who you are, it's the atmosphere and the classroom culture that you create. As a Mercy educator, you have the opportunity and the challenge to give your students not only an excellent academic foundation, but to help them make the Mercy charism their own, and to enable them to see their role in promoting social justice and the transformation of society. In order for us to be successful in this endeavor, all of us need to be conversant with those elements that make up our Catholic Mercy identity, mission, and values. We stand on the shoulders of great women of mercy and a long tradition of excellence in Catholic higher education. Knowing about the history and the foundations of our college is an essential ingredient for a well-prepared Mercy educator. Minimally, all Mercy educators should know about, have read, and be able to discuss the mission statements of both our college and the Conference for Mercy Higher Education. The story of Catherine McCauley, the founder of the Sisters of Mercy, and the foundation of the Community of Mercy. The basic teachings and principles of the Catholic Church and Catholic social teaching. And the papal encyclical Ex Corde Ecclesiae, from the heart of the Church. Ideally, you will find ways to deepen your knowledge and understanding of all that is implied in what is referenced here, and find ways to integrate it into your life and your work at the college. The further you go with this process, the more you will become identified not only as a Mercy educator, but also a mission leader. If this seems like a tall order, know that you are not alone, and that many resources are available to help you. In her book, Leadership and the New Science, Margaret Wheatley reminds us that the power of an organization is the capacity generated by relationships. The core values of community and collaboration that bind our college have the potential to enhance your understanding and integration of your role as a Mercy educator. Tapping into this power, this capacity, these relationships will empower you to teach and model what it means to be distinctively Mercy in the worlds in which your students will serve. At Gwynedd-Mercy College, we know that our students are receiving a quality education that prepares them to be successful in their careers and to be leaders in their professional lives. but we can and do offer them so much more as we complement a strong liberal arts foundation with a value-infused professional core. Their education for professional competency is significantly enhanced by the general education core that challenges them to go deeper into the mystery of human relationship and the need for mercy in the world in which they will live and work. It invites them into a story and a reality so rich that it has the power to transform lives. And so, a distinctive Mercy graduate is not only a success professionally, but it is one who lives a life of deep meaning and right relationship. This is the invitation and the challenge that is theirs, but it is yours as well, for you are the leader, the mentor, the facilitator, the teacher, and the role model who enables your students to see and embrace this Mercy identity. Thank you for accepting this awesome responsibility. Remember that you are not alone. Reach out to your colleagues. Participate in mission orientations and programs. Access the many print and media resources available on the portal, the website, and through our fine library holdings. Invite one of our many mission leaders to be your mission mentor. Contact the Office of Mission and Planning with any questions you have. We know it takes all of us together to make this vision a reality. May our God of mercy bless you on your journey, and may you find your life and your teaching enriched beyond your imaginings as you strive to be a distinctively Mercy educator. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tom Gilmore. I'm a faculty member in the Natural and Computational Sciences Division here at the School of Arts and Sciences at Gwynedd-Mercy College, and I also serve as the chair of the General Education Committee. And what I'd like to do today is to give you an orientation to the structure of general education. The education at Gwynedd-Mercy College is all about developing the distinctive Mercy graduate. We do this in the curriculum by breaking it into two different paths. Preparation in a specific major, it represents about 50% of a student's curriculum. So if they're going to be a communication major or a nurse major or an education major, half of their schoolwork would be taking place within the major. The other half, 50% of it approximately, is in the general education. And what I would like to do today is go into more detail on the structure of that general education so you can understand its intentionality. This is the outline of the general education. It has three major components. The first year experience, the signature courses, and the capstone course. Now, a traditional four-year student would enter the general education program in their first semester in the first year experience 1000. This is a 2-credit course in which students orient themselves towards the Mercy traditions and also transition to an academic environment. There's a second component to FYE 1000 called 1001, which is a service component where students actually have a hands-on service activity that they do in their typically second semester. You'll also notice college English is right underneath it there. Reflective writing and thinking are the hallmarks of our gen ed curriculum, and writing is stressed throughout the entire curriculum. In fact, all the signature courses are writing intensive. The signature courses is the area where we develop our academic understanding of the major disciplines in the school. Specifically, we have sociology, English, science, religious studies, history, and philosophy. And what has happened here is each of these departments has taken a look at their discipline as it relates to today's contemporary world and developed a course that's writing intensive that exposes students to the things they need to understand to exist in that world. This is all part of what we consider the development of the distinctive Mercy graduate. SOS 2000 addresses the major social issues in our modern world, and English 2001, which develops insights into the contributions to world culture through arts and works of literature. Science 2000, which is a science literacy course, but it focuses on the global energy problem. Religious Studies 2000, Sacred Writings, is all about how the Bible works, but also it looks at the writings of other non-Christian traditions. History 2000, Conflict and Consensus, can look at any conflict throughout world history, but it focuses on the cause of the conflict and the consensus and solution to that conflict. And the final one, Philosophy 2000, is the issue, ever-present issue of ethics. Underneath each of these 6 courses, of course, are the traditional distribution courses that we find in any college curriculum. A student would refer to their curriculum sheet to figure out what particular distribution courses they would need to take. This all culminates in what's called the capstone experience, and the capstone experience is delivered through the actual major. It's the bringing together of the traditions of general education with the major itself, and it is taught by the faculty within the major. And so, if you look at the numbering scheme for signature courses and first year courses, you can figure it out by FYE 1000 indicates the first year. The 2000s would be anywhere in the next 3 years. But your capstone courses all have the designation 4000, but they would also have the designation of the major, such as BUS Business 4000, or Nursing 4000, or Education 4000. Now this is for the full 4-year student. For students that transfer, there would be modifications, obviously, because we need to bring in the transfer credit. Most of it would come in underneath in the distribution courses, but every student will take at least 3 signature courses and 1 capstone course in their progress through a BS degree here at Gwynedd. And so I hope this introduction helped you understand our structure and our intentionality in our general education here at the college. As we go about our business of creating distinctive Mercy graduates in many, many majors. Thank you very much.
My name is Signore, and I am the coordinator of first year experience here at Gwynedd-Mercy College. First year experience is 2 courses that is required of all first year students here on the Gwynedd Valley campus that introduces them to a number of things, and it's their first introduction to our general education core curriculum. Our program consists of 2 courses, FYE 1000 and FYE 1001. It introduces students to a variety of different topics. FYE 1000 is the first course in the first year experience program that students take. It addresses 2 primary goals, academic success and personal development. So for the academic success, what you'll find students talking about in the class is issues with academic integrity, information literacy, plagiarism, cheating, the consequences of those, academic argument, logical fallacies, things that students need to know in order to be successful in their coursework. For the professional development piece of the course, we talk about issues around diversity, conflict management, citizenship, being a good citizen, working in community, information that is critical for students in order to be successful outside of the classroom. So we take a holistic approach to student development, and we recognize, particularly in that course, that there are many elements that contribute to a student's success here at Gwynedd. In FYE 1001, which the majority of students will take in their 2nd semester, we introduce students to the history and the heritage of the Sisters of Mercy, and we ask them to commit to completing approximately 5 hours of direct service in the community. Students may encounter many different issues while completing their service projects. They may work at local soup kitchens and talk about hunger and homelessness in our society. They may work with the elderly at local assisted living facilities. They may work with children at local facilities that create or provide educational opportunities and access to education for students, particularly those who live in the city. FYE helps students transition to college by providing them with a solid foundation in academic and personal success, and by exposing them to the core values of the institution. FYE is the first step along the pathway to becoming a distinctive Mercy graduate.
Hello, my name is Reilly. I'm the chair of the Behavioral and Social Sciences Division and a member of the faculty in the psychology program. I'd like to talk to you about the signature course for my division, Soch 2000, Society and Global Diversity. Soch 2000 is both a psychology and a sociology course in terms of its content. The topics we cover are addressed from both a psychological and a sociological perspective. Although we honor the concept of academic freedom, it is our intention and the purpose of this video to provide our students with a common learning experience. It is our expectation that this course, wherever it is taught, is aligned with the outcomes identified by your faculty colleagues on the main campus. Topics that are addressed in this course include social stratification, racism, sexism, education, the family, the environment, among other topics. We try to examine the issues from a global as well as a local perspective. For example, while we read the essay of Jonathan Kozol entitled Still Separate, Still Unequal, that critiques the injustice found in the American school system, many of us have our students view the PBS special entitled Time for School, which compares and contrasts the learning experiences of children throughout the world. We also examine the experience of women in the United States and compare it to that of women living in countries in the Middle East. While each country may not fully recognize the equality of women, it is interesting and important for our students to learn about the plight of women in other places on the globe. Of course, all of these issues are to be examined through the lens of mercy, which calls for social justice for all people. The course is designed to be writing intensive. Although the number varies, each of our instructors requires students to submit a paper on each of the topics studied in the course. Some instructors, although not most, may require tests. I base my students' grades entirely on a portfolio of papers and one 10 to 15 minute presentation, including a PowerPoint. The presentation is based on a persuasive letter each student is required to write and discuss. For those of you who will be teaching at a CLL campus, this may make a good pre-course assignment. Each student must identify a social condition that they believe needs to be addressed. The need to research the issue and identify one person, usually a governmental figure, whom they believe could influence this problem. To whom it may concern doesn't work in this case. They need to write a 4 to 6 page paper explaining why this is a problem, what is currently being done, and what should be done in the future. The letter should not be mailed. The presentation and the PowerPoint is based on this letter. To summarize, Soch 2000 is a dynamic course that we hope reflects the issues of our times and heightens the sensitivity of our students to those people who suffer from social injustice. We examine each issue in the light of the mission and values of this institution and the charism of our sponsors, the Sisters of Mercy. Thank you for your attention, and if I can be of help as you navigate through the process of teaching this course, please do not hesitate to call me.
Hello everyone. I'm happy to be with you today. My name is Carol Breslin, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Betsy Chapin. Both of us are instructors of English in the Language, Literature, and Fine Arts Division. And we're here with you today to talk a bit about English 2001, Arts and Ideas, a signature course here at Gwynedd-Mercy College. You probably know already that signature courses are part of, they form the core curriculum in our general education. All of our students are required to take these courses. Our purpose today is to reflect with you a little bit on the nature of this course, give you an overview of it, our sense of what can be done in the course, and what our general expectations are. We're hoping that through this conversation, you'll have an idea of what the goals of the course are and what can be done with it. It will be a conversation. Betsy and I will pop in at various moments to comment on what we do alike in the course and some of the individual differences. English 2001 is a signature course offered by the Division of Language, Literature, and Fine Arts. And I think you can think of it as a kind of version of Comp 2 in many ways, because in this course what we try to do is to refine and polish many of the writing skills that our students practice when they are in college English. But it also has the character of an intellectual heritage course,
Yes.
the kind of course that you may have heard of offered at Temple University, because the students are exposed to the great minds, the great thinkers, the great texts of Western culture. And in addition to that, we have to add in that it also has an arts dimension. After all, the title is Arts and Ideas. And we do look at the literary arts, the plastic arts, the performing arts, all of these making up this course. It's a course that emphasizes reading and writing and discussion. And with the right class, even with the wrong class, I think, it can be a really wonderful course in many ways. In large measure because of the kinds of materials, the kinds of thinkers that you are working with. In this course, we use a text. I use the text A World of Ideas by Lee Jacobus. It's a nice collection of essays with units in it on government, on justice, on poverty and wealth, on science, on ethics, on the arts. Longish essays, challenging essays, but wonderful pieces, because just about every essay in the text can somehow be connected to an event going on currently. And so you're able to make some wonderful connections between the ideas of these great thinkers and what's going on in the environment, in their real lives. Now, I know Betsy uses a different text, and she might want to tell you a bit about that.
I use the McGraw-Hill reader, and it is much like that. It has some more readings in it. It's a bit thicker. You could really use several different kinds of what we would call comp readers. And the idea is that you get different topics, such as everything from education, government, politics, social justice, as Carol mentioned the others, business, economics, medicine, nature and the environment is an important component in my course, science and technology, literature and the arts. And these two readers that we have mentioned, as well as others, can give you substantive readings and excerpts from excellent authors in these books. And to me, one of the things that makes the signature course most distinctive is not necessarily the book that you use, the reader, but how those selections are assigned and how they are applied and analyzed in class. And it coordinates with the writing assignments in that the 4 letters that we assign are those connected to 4 of these topics, and their fundamental purpose and focus is to write a letter of persuasion to someone in authority who can effect change on that particular topic. So the students can write to anyone from President Obama to President Kathleen Owens, to their high school math teacher, to a local civic leader, to someone who can effect change in that way. And the novel that I use at the end for the long research essay, Frankenstein, that novel seems to gather many of these ideas at the end and therefore allow them to analyze something as complex as this novel and as common as the ideas in all of these things that are flowing through their ordinary lives every day.
I think one of the challenges in teaching this course, and I know Betsy would agree with this, is that we often get students in class who don't read and write with ease. And so the challenge for the teacher is to make that happen, to help them to read and write with ease. And there are a variety of things that you can do. And I'd like to just describe a couple of the things that I've done in various sessions of this course. I usually begin, purely because it's one of my favorite sections, with government. And so the students read a bit of Machiavelli's The Prince, an excerpt from that, and they also read the Declaration of Independence. And before they come to class, having read those texts, I ask them to respond to a writing prompt. And the prompt is a very simple question. I say to them, how would you describe the characteristics of an effective ruler, an effective head of state? So they come to the class having written on that topic a paragraph or two, and they share their writings with the class. And we're then able to get a nice conversation going, because the class is a discussion-based class, a nice conversation going about what are the differences between what they saw that they wanted in a head of state as opposed to what Machiavelli describes in The Prince. And what is the difference between what they require and what Jefferson describes when he talks about the king that they're rebelling against in the Declaration of Independence. And then we're also able to speak about, well, what are the differences between Machiavelli's points and Jefferson's points, and it leads to a very, very nice conversation on that topic. But I have to say, one of my favorite topics that we explore in this class is the arts part of Arts and Ideas. And when I teach that particular section, I focus on poetry and film. In the poetry section, the students eventually get to write their own poetry, and that's their writing assignment for that section of the course. But I begin with an event that I find delightful. We all sit around in a circle, and I present to the students a poem by Wallace Stevens called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, a poem they've probably never seen before. And in a very deliberate and kind of leisurely style, we walk through the poem together. And I ask the students to comment on images and concepts that they see in each stanza of the poem. It's a very different kind of poetry. They're not used to it. It probably doesn't look like poetry to them or sound like poetry, but by the end of that walkthrough and in our discussion, I think they have a good idea of just how flexible the notion of poetry can be, and they're really getting into the creative process of that artist. And the next part I really love, because I send them home with this assignment. They have to pick another object, and I often suggest to them a tree, and they have to write a couple of stanzas about that tree, imitating their favorite stanzas in the poem by Wallace Stevens. It doesn't matter to me which they choose, whatever one is attractive to them and meaningful to them. And then they come back to the next class, and the first thing we do is look at the stanzas they've written. And it's really fun because they become poets themselves. And that's a good thing, because eventually they're going to have to write a few poems of their own that they will submit, one of which they will read aloud to the class as their ending assignment for that section of the course.
Poetry is a wonderful way to open up students' minds to what ideas they really think about language.
Yes.
And I always tell my students, poetry is liberty of imagery, just images, or something they think could be considered imagery. No sentences, no rhyming, 3 different lines. They may or may not be connected by content or subject. And it is difficult for them to get out of the iron hold of grammar and the structure of how they think about language, which of course informs how they think about and create ideas. And so we take the creativity of thinking and the visual arts, and we try to incorporate them into poetry itself. And they produce very profound 3-line poems. And as we connect that then to the next assignment on the arts, photography. And as I say, let's continue to think about how we process visual imagery, first in poetry and then in photography. And one of the assignments that has worked very well for me is to have the students take 5 photographs. Anytime in the semester they can take these 5 photographs. And it has to connect to a subject. Their photography has to connect to a subject on our syllabus, such as nature and the environment, or education, or medicine, any subject they want. And sometimes I give them this prompt, and sometimes not. But for example, one semester, I said, try to coordinate your photographs around subjects and objects that you think no one notices. Scenery, anything, but that is not noticed or paid attention to. And yet it is part of what comes into your mind every day. And I have just been so impressed with what they bring together. And the assignment is 5 photographs and it goes onto a PowerPoint presentation, and 1 page of that PowerPoint is comprised of 5 bullet points that just gives us their thoughts at the very end, after we see these photographs, their thoughts about why they chose these particular ones. And it just reveals the richness of this course and its ideas and the arts, that they are all of a piece. And the students very much enjoy that exercise.
Yes. And there are many, many devices that you can use to make it work. And we've tried to mention a few of those today. A concern also in a course like this is Mercy values, because these signature courses are certainly supposed to communicate those in a special way. Doing that with this particular course, Arts and Ideas, is really simple, because the text and the works of art do it for you.
Yes.
You know, how can you read about essays about poverty and wealth and not think of treating the needs of the poor and compassion for those in need?
Yes. It can be a very rewarding course to teach in ways that you do not really get opportunities to use in how you teach other courses.
Exactly.
It really can be
Yes.
very much more creative in the spectrum of the kinds of assignments.
Yes.
And
offers you, as a teacher, a great opportunity to connect in very real ways with the students in the
Yes.
class,
yes,
in ways that maybe other courses don't.
yes.
Yeah. So we encourage you to enjoy this course and make it your own. Use your own creativity in coming up with ways to explore these ideas and these art forms with your students. So we hope you enjoy teaching this course, and we wish you good luck.
We thank you very much for your efforts in this course, and we hope you enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Welcome to the group of instructors who teach Sci 2000 from the telescope to the microscope. Sci 2000 is the science signature course in Gwynedd-Mercy College General Education program. Sci 2000 is designed to be a scientific look at the natural world, to look at the natural world through social responsibility, to consider the interrelationship of science, mathematics, and technology, and to look at the natural world in terms of our stewardship of not only our natural resources, but also each other. The goal of Sci 2000 is to foster a responsible scientific literacy. We hope students will be able to answer the question, what can we do? So they need a basic understanding of the principles of science, but they also need to answer the questions, what should we do? They need to understand how science and technology are related to social and political issues and to ethical issues. The science signature course satisfies 4 of the signature course goals. We look to engage in a community of research using inquiry and communication. We try to analyze scientific data looking for interrelationships and patterns. We try to demonstrate an understanding of the impact of technology on society. And finally, we try to instill an understanding of quantitative reasoning. So those are our goals. How do we go about addressing those goals? Well, first of all, Sci 2000 courses, regardless of who teaches them, all have a uniform curriculum. We have common content, we have a common text and tools, and this is our text. This is Trefl and Hazen's The Science and Integrated Approach, and this textbook was chosen because it exactly matches the goals of this course. We have common assessments and we have common grading, but that doesn't mean we have cookie-cutter courses. Every instructor in the group has a different approach to the course. Every instructor emphasizes a different perspective while they teach basically the same material. One instructor approaches the course as a straightforward science survey course. Another instructor has an environmental perspective. A third teaches it with a view to evolutionary biology. But it's all basically the same course. The course content moves from the scientific method, how do we do science, so students understand how scientists ask questions, go about finding the answers, and they also understand which questions are not suitable to be answered by science. We look at physics, that's the telescope. We look at the operating instructions for the universe. We look at chemistry, the raw materials that the universe is made of. We look at earth and space science. We start out with the universe, move into the solar system, look at planet Earth. And finally, we look at biology. There's the microscope. We look at life on Earth. And each of the three preceding sections informs the kind of life that we find on Earth. The resources that we have are primarily Blackboard and the Trefl and Hazen website. And if you'll bear with me a minute, I'll show you how we use Blackboard. This is Blackboard, as you'll see it, and this is a current course for Sci 2000. So you'll see, looking at the menu, we have syllabus information, we have lecture notes, we have narrated lectures, we have assignments posted with rubrics, we have originality reports, we have quizzes, we put up answer keys, and we have external links. So all of the course information that's found on Blackboard is there for the students' use. There's also interactive material. And we use it for internet links, for student grades, and for the plagiarism checker, which is an important part of the reports that we require. The second website that's especially useful to the student is the Trefl and Hazen Student Companion site. And the Trefl and Hazen Student Companion site is exactly that. For each chapter in the textbook, there is a set of quizzes, there are a set of web links, and there are information resources that the student can use for the material in that particular chapter. And students find this especially useful when they practice for exams. So the practice quizzes give them a good idea of the kind of material that they need to have a handle on. The common assessments and the grading are also done in common. We have examinations, assignments, an energy project, and participation. And the distribution of grades is pretty much the same across the board for all of the instructors on campus. One of the most important things that we find in the grade is the participation grade. Because unless students feel that there is a reason for being in the class, they don't come to the class in the beginning. So attendance tends to be relatively sparse. Once they get into the course and realize that their participation really is required, that it's an active discussion course, then the participation grade makes a lot more sense to them. So first you bribe them to come, and then they come on their own. The examinations, there are 4 examinations, including one that we call the final, only because it's given during finals week. The examinations are non-cumulative, they're content-oriented, they consist of both objective and essay questions, and each instructor generates his or her own exams. So there is not an exam for the course. However, we try to include 1 or 2 common questions across the courses for each exam. So those questions, those common questions, are generated by the instructors as a committee of the whole. The assignments that we have in common are, first of all, classroom investigations. These are hands-on exercises designed to illustrate important principles. Some of the hands-on activities are extremely simple. This bag contains all of the materials you need to demonstrate the principles of static electricity. So during one class period, students will get a bag, and a group of students will work together and will answer questions that lead them to the principles of static electricity. Some of the classroom exercises are a little more complicated, and we end up here in the laboratory for experiments on sound and waves, for experiments dealing with chemical reactions. And all experiments are designed according to good laboratory practices and laboratory safety. The post-chapter assignments are simple exercises that reinforce the chapter concepts. Every assignment has a common rubric, so every instructor knows what the assignment is and knows what's expected of the student. Here's a sample chapter assignment. Student gets a red cup, and all students know what you use these red cups for. They punch holes in the bottom, and they fill them with water. And then they watch what happens. And you know what happens when you fill a cup, punch holes in it, and the water runs out. The second thing they do is they fill the cup again, keep their fingers over the holes, and drop it. When they let go, they get what's called an unexpected event. And it's up to them to explain that unexpected event based on the principles they learned in the chapter. So every assignment has a rubric. This is the rubric for this particular assignment. So faculty members all know what we're looking for in the assignment, what we hope students will get out of it, what the important concepts are. There are also extra credit assignments, and the extra credit assignments are designed to balance the participation grade. So a student who misses a classroom investigation loses the points for that classroom investigation. They didn't do it. However, they can then do another assignment to pick up those grades. So we have bonus problem sets in physics. Some people like to do math, other people don't. A museum visit. Very many students in the Philadelphia area have never been to the Academy of Natural Sciences, to the Franklin Institute, to the Mutter Museum. So this is an incentive to visit one of those museums, see science in action, and get extra credit points for it. The big assignment for the semester is the energy project. And the energy project investigates one of the most important scientific questions that we have today. And that is, what are we going to do about energy? So students look at fossil fuels, they look at alternative energy sources, and then they get to be king of the world. They get to develop an energy policy for the next 50 years. So they need to do research. They need to do research on fossil fuels. They need to do research on alternative energy. And then they need to come to a reflective opinion, one that is based on research, but one also that allows them a little creativity and allows them to make some hypotheses based on what they've learned. Each step of this requires an originality report generated by the Blackboard Safe Assign function. So we are very concerned about plagiarism, not only from outside sources, but also from students within the class. Each one of these has a rubric. This one was a little bigger to fit on the slide. So you can see the rubrics not only include content, but they also include things like style and mechanics and sources. Okay? And the total grade then includes reflection, research, and style. Now, Sci 2000 is also offered at the Center for Lifelong Learning. But due to the method of content delivery at CLL, the course needs to be adapted. It's not different, it's just adapted. My colleague Tom Gilmore is going to explain how CLL runs Sci 2000. Tom?
Thank you, Felicia. We're very keen that Sci 2000, when it is taught at CLL, be as equivalent as possible to Sci 2000 being taught on the main campus. And so we need to address the differences. And the differences are the amount of time. At this point, the course is delivered in 5 weeks at CLL. We're hoping that increases to 6. And the contact time is different. 5 hours, or in those 5 weeks, students meet with the faculty member on main campus for 40 hours, at CLL for 20 hours. And so there has to be some adjustments made. Additionally, we don't have access to a wet lab. One of the things that we do is we reduce the number of assignments and we modify the energy project. Instead of it being 3 parts, it's one more comprehensive part and fewer assignments, and we also adjust the grades so that the energy project counts for a higher percentage of the grade, and the participation, or the individual assignments are less. The other aspect is, since a student only has 20 hours with the faculty member, what are they going to do with the other 20 hours, which is done independently? And we're very fortunate because one of the co-authors of the textbook, Robert Hazen, has also taken that exact same course and filmed it on DVD, 65 1/2-hour lectures. And so the way we teach Sci 2000 at CLL is we put the burden on the student. We've made modifications because of the timing differences. We've reduced the number of assignments because of the shortened period of time, but we've still concentrated on the content, and we have not changed any of the content. And what would happen is, in a class, I would begin lecturing the content for that week. There's 5 weeks, and so each week is specified as to what's to be covered that week. When I finish at 10 o'clock that evening, I identify where I've finished and what needs to be done for the rest of that week. And then in the Joy of Science DVDs put together by the Great Courses Company, identify what lectures the students are responsible to take through Professor Hazen. They come back the next week, and seamlessly we have a test. We have 4 tests just like we do on main campus on the content taught by both me and Professor Hazen. And the tests are broken up so that I can tell if the students have been doing their outside work as well by the grades in that section of the test. That is the sum and substance difference between CLL or Sci 2000 offered at CLL versus main campus. And we're very keen that these experiences that the students go through be as equivalent as possible and not affected by the delivery system.
Instructors who teach Sci 2000, either on main campus or at CLL, need to commit to this model that we've described. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ed Miller from the Department of Religious Studies, and I have been asked to explain our signature course in Religious Studies to new adjuncts who will be teaching it. I was the one who designed the course, so I want to share with you what the department is wanting those of you who will be teaching it for us to be achieving for the most part. And of course, I welcome you to our effort to teach the course. My introduction to the course is divided into 4 parts. And part 1 involves the syllabus itself. On all the syllabi for this course, no matter where it is taught, we want the following 2 opening paragraphs on it. I want to read them to you because they are important for what we're trying to achieve. The new signature course in Religious Studies introduces students to the issues involved in reading and understanding sacred text, whether one reads the text as a believer or not. Now, given the nature of Gwynedd-Mercy College, the biblical text of the Old and New Testament form the core of the course. To provide comparisons and contrast with this literature, some selective sacred writings are chosen from Asian and Islamic materials, but this is not a course on world religions. I teach the course over 15 weeks, and only 2 weeks are devoted to material other than Old and New Testament. So that's the first thing. This is not a world religions course. Secondly, regarding outcomes, and this again is something that the syllabi need to have on it, and you can find this material out from the head of the Religious Studies Department. This course is designed to meet certain learning outcomes identified by Gwynedd-Mercy College and the general education curriculum. I do not print those in my syllabus, it gets too big, but you can find out those items and post them on Blackboard as I do, or whatever. Each Gen Ed course, but I return to what you do need to have on the syllabus, each Gen Ed course has unique goals associated with outcomes assessment, such as enhancing communication skills, etc. 5 goals have been selected in Religious Studies. Reading and analyzing primary text, and the primary text is going to be the scriptures. Engendering religious literacy, so that students are aware of the many biblical and non-biblical dimensions and images that inform our culture. Investigating how sacred texts portray diversity within a religious community. And lastly, and most important, teaching how sacred writings work, that is, how they were meant to be understood. If you were to ask me, what is the nature of this course, it is teaching students, undergraduate students, how the scriptures work. Now, the text for the course is going to be the New American Bible Revised Edition. It is not this New American Bible, but the Revised Edition that has just come out. If you teach it on the main campus, the bookstore will only be carrying this. But I wanted to write down the ISBN number in case you are ordering it from elsewhere. It only cost $7.95 for the students. You can't even buy a pizza for that price anymore. It's a very inexpensive but excellent book. It's the New American Bible, which has been out for a long time, but it's the revised edition. This has only been out for about a year and a half. And the ISBN number for this is 987-1-59982-172. And this comes from St. Mary's Press in Winona, Wisconsin. It is my strong advice to anybody teaching this course to have everybody having the same edition. Why do I say that? If I were to ask someone to open up to 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verse 23, people would have a hard time getting their way to it. It's much better to say, open up to page 475, there's chapter 2. So that is my strong advice, that everybody use the same ISBN text. In terms of requirements, we allow each adjunct to more or less set his or her own requirements according to emphases you bring to the course. But all of these courses are meant to be writing intensive. For me, writing intensive does not mean writing long-term papers. I don't see how you teach people to write better by having them write a 15-page paper and you have to read 25 of them. What I do is give very short 1 or 2 page assignments, and then I mark up the grammar on them. I want to teach students how to write better. And the only way you can do that is by marking up the paper. So I don't assign a lot of writing, but it is intensive in that sense. Finally, the mode in which this is taught, the course mainly ought to be taught in a 15-week semester. That is to say, a final 15th week for final exam, and 14 other weeks for going through the material. Sometimes you can compact that into the first and second summer sessions, which are 6 weeks courses that meet rather intensively. There's a third mode for teaching this. I do not think this course is very suitable for that mode, and that's the mode presently used off campus, in which a professor meets the students once a week for 5 weeks, and on their own they meet once a week for 5 weeks. I do not think you can go through this kind of material in that format, but I leave that to others who want to try it. Regarding text, I already mentioned the scriptures, but I also want to mention for you, not for the students, I also mentioned for you some materials that if you study them, you would be teaching the course in the style and mode and with the emphases that befits our own Catholic tradition and the best of biblical scholarship. The single most important book in English for the New Testament is the following book by Raymond E. Brown, An Introduction to the New Testament. I would encourage you to take it out of the library or to buy a copy and to study it yourself. You could not use this as a text for our students, much too detailed. Another book is a biblical commentary called the New Jerome Biblical Commentary, covering the Old and the New Testament. Do not confuse this with the Jerome Biblical Commentary from the 1960s. This is a much better edition, which came out about 20 years ago. Excellent, excellent scholarship, the New Jerome Biblical Commentary. And finally, when I do get to tell you in part 2, or part 3 rather, about the creation stories in the book of Genesis, my advice to you is to pick up from the library Larry Boat. He spells his name B-O-A-D-T, but pronounced Larry Boat. His Reading the Old Testament, an Introduction, and the chapter he has on the creation stories in Genesis is just excellent. So those are helps to you. Now with that, I'm going to conclude part 1, and I'll see you again very soon for part 2. Welcome back for part 2. And part 2 is going to be a rather short reflection on the small portion of the course that uses Asian and Islamic sacred writings. The whole point of using these is to really show the comparisons and contrasts one can draw with sacred writings from other parts of the world. Now, the reason, I'll tell you what I do, and I would recommend it, because in the book of Genesis we're going to be looking at creation stories. I share with the students on handouts I produce. I do not have the students buy a text. I share handouts from Hindu literature on creation stories because we want to introduce students to mythic language. Secondly, I use the very famous Benares sermon of the Buddha, in which he talks about the Four Noble Truths, because one can make the case that the first of those noble truths, that all life is suffering, which in the Sanskrit they use a word that refers to life being off kilter, is as close, I think, as other religions come to the doctrine of original sin. Something is off kilter. And for me, it's rather interesting that other sacred writings get into this. Anyway, we look at that. Islam is interesting in itself, and more interesting after 9/11, which is one reason why we want to have this component in the class. And we look at the Quran, and I do look at certain jihad texts in the Quran, but I want to show the students that the word jihad does not mean how it's used today mostly. Jihad means an inner struggle for yourself to become a better Muslim, inner purity. However, one of the nice contrasts that studying Islam presents is the way Muslims understand how the Quran came to be, in which they say that the angel Jibril, which is their phrase for the angel Gabriel, the angel Jibril came from Allah and whispered into Allah's ear revelations from Allah, which Muhammad then recited, and other people wrote them down, and that's the Quran. Now that vision of revelation happening that way is not how Christians understand the New Testament or the Old Testament revelation happened. But on the picture behind me is Rembrandt's picture of St. Matthew and the angel whispering in St. Matthew's ear. That is precisely how Islam sees the Quran coming to be, but it provides a nice contrast when I teach another way to understand how Revelation came to be captured in writing. I'm ending part 2 now, so I'm going to stand up and so that I'm not blocking Rembrandt's great picture, but with that, we'll end part 2. Well, welcome back, friends, to part 3. And part 3 covers that portion of the course that deals with Old Testament sacred writings, or properly called the Tanakh. That's how Jewish people call their sacred writings, the Tanakh. I'm going to focus only on one part of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, that I think you ought to cover in your course. No matter what else you do, I think you need to cover the 2 creation stories in the book of Genesis, because most people have heard them and most people don't understand them. And if this course is meant to show you how the Bible works, then that's a great case to use. Now, I begin myself with a teaser question to the students, which is meant to sort of intellectually back them into a checkmate situation. If you take Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, last year was the year 5773, and what that means, if you interpret the Bible literally, is that 5,770 some years ago the world began, with Adam and Eve or whatever, the world began then. If you look at the data of science, the world began much longer, much before that, and Homo sapiens appeared on the earth at least 250,000 years ago. So here's the teaser question. We have a story about Adam and Eve. No one else was there to hear it, and so someone could say the only reason why we know what happened is because they passed down the word. However, if they only lived about 5,000 years ago, you could say, well, something could have been passed down like that. An oral tradition passing down the story. However, if you're scientific, as most people are, and as I am, Homo sapiens, the first human beings, call them Adam and Eve, began 250,000 years ago at least, with many ice ages in between. So how did we get the story? You kind of caught on that. And what I do in the class is to explain to the students that this is really a wrong-headed question which backs you into a corner. There's actually a third way to see this, which is the way that we think the Bible came to be written. Well, welcome back to this extension of part 3 on the Old Testament, and in particular on the creation stories. First of all, make sure your students, in reading Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, realize that there are 2 different creation stories there. They're not contradictory, but they take 2 different approaches to describing creation. Here's what we think happened. Following a covenanting of the Israelite people on Mount Sinai, a place to which they were led by Moses, and where they did experience the mystery of the one God. Let me represent Mount Sinai by this little triangle. This is my mountain. That's Mount Sinai. We think this was about 1250 BC. And this people goes through history. They eventually get to the Promised Land. And this squiggly line represents oral tradition. People telling the next generation what happened at Sinai, who was Moses, what does the God of Israel want of us, etc., etc. So they go through history. One of the things that happens, of course, in living in the Promised Land is that they are surrounded by more advanced cultures who also have creation stories. And for the Israelites, these creation stories were things to be avoided at all costs. So I'm going to use a red line to indicate danger. Surrounding them are other cultures, and one of the biggest cultures was the Babylonian culture, which had a number of very strong creation stories. One of them is the Enuma Elish, E-N-U-M-A, E-L-I-S-H, and another one was the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was a Babylonian hero, Gilgamesh. What we think happened was that one of these stories in the book of Genesis, take the Adam and Eve story, which scholars call the J story, and in the Larry Boat book you can find out what that J means. That the J story was constructed. If I use the word fabricated, I hesitate to use that word in front of students because they think it's made up and it's false. But it is actually formulated and constructed over against Gilgamesh. And so therefore they take certain elements from the Gilgamesh story, which they thought was awful, awful views of many, many gods and why people died. They were very much against that, but they took certain elements out of that and they embedded them into their own story. So for example, in Gilgamesh, there is a magic piece of wood which the gods withhold from you because they don't want you to be immortal by eating it. And there is a tree of life in the middle of the garden, which as long as you have access to it, you keep on living. But if for some reason you are expelled from the garden, you are mortal. I want to just use, I'm going to bring up on the PowerPoint here, if you can just pause another second. I'm going to bring up something I use on PowerPoints. And I want to talk to you about the phrase, Eve was made from the rib of Adam, vastly misunderstood by people. Right, welcome back again. Again, the purpose of this course for you as an adjunct is to show the students how the Bible works. And so I'm picking out some rather tricky issues. One of them is the famous story in the Garden of Eden that Adam is put into a sleep, and that because he was lonely, God formed from his rib and put flesh on it, a woman. But notice the text in Genesis that as soon as the man sees the woman, he says, "This one at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." There is in Hebrew an idiom to be flesh and bone. It's like an idiom we use in English to say someone hits a home run. I hope in making this video for you, I'm hitting a home run, which means it's a good job as opposed to striking out. We all use idioms. Hebrew language has an idiom to be flesh and bone. in the story in Genesis of Jacob being sent by his mother to marry a girl from her old homeland area, he goes all the way up to modern-day Iraq. He meets a beautiful woman at the well who is the daughter of his uncle Laban. And as soon as she finds out that our relative Jacob has come, she runs to Laban and says, come see your relative. And the first thing that Laban says to her is, you are my flesh and my bone. It's a Hebrew idiom to say we are equal, we are of the same nature. And so the story of Eve and the Adam and Eve story is not to say women come from bones of men, although many people think that, but rather to talk about inequality. The religious teaching is that men and women, as created by God, are equal. They are of the same nature. They are meant to be companions to each other, etc. So that's one good example of how you as a teacher need to tell the students how this thing works. Speaking of the PowerPoints behind me, my students over 3 or 4 years have very much liked the fact that I only use the Bible and don't have them buy a textbook. You, as an adjunct, can order a textbook if you want. Then, of course, you need to teach from it and have the students justify the money the students pay. But I would encourage you to get up a good set of PowerPoints. The students give me feedback that they like this, and it gives you a whole bunch of information that you can see. Now, one other thing on how the Bible works is what is called a theophany. Theophany. It's a description of the appearance of God, yet it's told in very human-like terms. I want to give you one example from the book of Joshua, chapter 5. And this is another thing you need to be teaching the students. Joshua, Moses has died, and Joshua has been asked to lead the Israelites into this land. Of course, the people who live there don't like the fact that he's coming, and they're going to fight. Now here's how the text reads. While Joshua was near Jericho, he raised his eyes, and he saw someone who stood facing him, drawn sword in hand. And Joshua went up to him and asked, are you one of us or one of our enemies? And he replied, neither. I am the captain of the Lord of the host, and I have just arrived. And Joshua fell prostrate on the ground and worshipped. And what has the Lord to say to his servant? And the captain of the host said, remove your sandals because you are standing on sacred ground. Now those are telltale. Joshua did not meet somebody who looks like you and me with a sword in his hand. It was an experience of the mystery of God because he fell down and worshipped, and he was on sacred ground. What was happening? Joshua was pretty afraid going into battle. And he and he has an experience of God in which God is saying to him, do not be so afraid, I will be with you. But as the story is told, it is told in this what's called a theophany. Many of your students who read the Bible will read it literally. They will think he met somebody, and it's your job to show how the Bible works. Now with that, I'm going to end part 3 and go to part 4, our last part. Welcome back, friends, to part 4, which is the last part of this introduction to the course that we want you to teach for our department. And it's on the New Testament portion. I myself, in teaching this course, make the New Testament portion the largest portion of the course, and it's the section of the scriptures that most students tend to have knowledge about, although the knowledge may be somewhat strange. And part of the course is to show them how the Bible works. The Gospels, the 4 Gospels. Most people read the Gospels as if they are like modern biographies. Jesus did this, then he did that, and the next day he did something else. The Gospels were not written in the way we write a modern biography. The Gospels were written to show Jesus' religious significance and meaning. Everything is geared to giving his religious significance and meaning, even the titles that are used in the Bible. Let me give you an example of a use of the text to give his meaning. If you look at the death scene in Mark's Gospel, the centurion at the cross says at the moment Jesus dies, truly this was the Son of God. Now the Romans didn't let anybody get close to crucifixion scenes, so one question is, how do you know he said that? Leave that to the side a moment. That's what he said. If you read Luke's gospel, the same centurion says when Jesus dies, truly this man was innocent. And what is happening is the gospel writer is putting on the lips of the centurion an insight statement for you, the reader, showing you what does his death mean. That's how the gospels function. They are in terms of his religious significance. Now, the hardest thing to get down for the students, and if you teach this, and I urge you to attack it, is to use the board somehow. That's what I'm going to do now, to use the board. The heart of the Catholic understanding of the Gospels is the division of the first century into 3 periods. So I'm going to draw a timeline here representing basically 100 years, with the first third corresponding to the death of Jesus. He dies on the cross. And the second third, about the year 66 to 70, represents when the uprising led by the Zealots tried to fight the Romans, which was a suicidal thing, and the Romans sent in a whole military division called a legion and killed them all and tore down the temple. But it provides a period of the last third of the century. The first third of the century, called this period 1, is the time when Jesus walked around Palestine. He looked like you and me. He spoke in Aramaic. People who walked with him could say, I hear what he's preaching, I know what he's saying. They also would know what the color of his hair and things like that. That's called the Jesus of history. His life ends in death. But on the other side of death, Scripture says he is raised by the Father in resurrection, and from resurrection, he appears to these disciples. And these disciples do a very un-Jewish thing. They go out to talk to other Jews about Jesus. Jewish people do not evangelize, even today. But they start preaching about Jesus. So period number 2 is the preaching of eyewitnesses about Jesus. If you ask these people, what is your religion? They're all Jews. They don't have their own scriptures yet. Their scriptures are the scriptures of the law, the prophets, and the writings. Now, I need to use another color here. So they're preaching about Jesus. This is an oral tradition. About halfway through this middle period, they begin to preach in Greek-speaking areas of the world, and even to Gentiles who are Greek-speaking. So I'm going to put it in green. The preaching here is in green. At some point in the second period, the eyewitness preachers die out. Some are put to death. Peter's put to death. Paul is put to death. James is put to death. Others simply die of old age. But they're dying out. And since their message is so important, the natural tendency is for people to write it down. And that's exactly what happened. So the writing down of the message, although they tend to write down this portion, the Greek portion, produces documents we now know as Gospels. And since I wrote it in green, I'm going to say that we have a Gospel which we now call the Gospel of Mark. In Greek, we have a Gospel of Luke, Gospel of Matthew, and a Gospel of John in Greek. The people who wrote these Gospels did not walk with Jesus. They're called them second generation, but they are recording what is written down in terms of the preaching. This solves a lot of problems as you deal with how the scriptures work. Now, welcome back to this very last portion of the Gospels of my 4th section, and this is the hardest to teach students, and it could be very hard for you. So let me just draw something on the board and leave with the hope that somehow it may make some sense. This is, when you raise the question of the Gospels and the interconnection, you're left with a puzzlement. If you read in Greek, and you know Greek very well, why are Matthew, Mark, and Luke so alike, and John is so different? Matthew, Mark, and Luke seem like kissing cousins, and John is very, very different. But when you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Mark has hardly any teachings in it, and Matthew and Luke has a lot of teachings. So they're kissing cousins, but Mark doesn't seem to have teachings of Jesus. And thirdly, the word verbatim means word for word, and if you look at some of the teachings in Matthew and Luke, in the Greek, they're verbatim. How do you get, unless they were copying from each other, and they were not, how do you get verbatim teachings? This is how we think we solve it. That if this represents Jesus of Palestine, he had among him, he gathered disciples among himself. The 12 apostles are there, but there's also a person called the beloved disciple. Jesus dies, I'm going to put this in red because the cross had a lot of blood in it. Jesus dies and resurrects and appears to the disciples. Something happened at the beginning, and you can read and write down what this might be, but a community, a small group of people with the beloved disciple as their key figure, leave Jerusalem and go their own way teaching about Jesus. This is oral tradition, teaching about Jesus. The majority of those Jews who believed in Jesus stayed in the Jerusalem area at first, talking about Jesus and preaching about Jesus. So there's a split. One of the things that happens with a document we do not now have, but we can project that it must have existed, was at some point a document just collecting teachings of Jesus came into existence. And this document is called the Q document, from the German word for source document, source of teachings. Another document came into existence in the late 60s, I'm going to put it in red, which we now call the Gospel according to Mark. And we think that this writer said there was too much emphasis on Jesus as a teacher and we're forgetting the cross. And so his life of Jesus really does accentuate the cross. This classroom has a cross up in it. If I were to shine a light on the cross and you could see it on the floor, outline of the cross, all through Mark's gospel is kind of a shadow of the cross. But he had a life of Jesus without the teachings. About 25 years later, two other documents come into existence. I'll draw them in black and green. A document called Matthew's Gospel. And this author, this sacred writer, knows of the existence of Mark, and so he draws from Mark the basic story outlined from Mark. He draws from Q a couple of teachings from Q, and he draws from the oral tradition stories he does not want lost, and he takes them into his own document. A document which we call now the Gospel of Luke. What color do I have? It must be black. He also knows of the existence of Mark, and he takes from Mark the basic outline. And he also draws from the tradition of preaching certain stories that are unique to him. This group down here that went its own way, they produced a gospel quite independent from this, and that's the gospel we now know as the Gospel of John. Now, in teaching this to students, you'd have to do it slower than I'm doing it with you, and you'd have to use more examples, but it solves the problem. Why are Matthew, Mark, and Luke so alike? Well, they come from the same tradition associated with the 12. Why is John so different? He came from a group of people who went their own way, had their own memories of Jesus after many, many years that differ from this group. Why does Mark have hardly any teachings in it? He wanted to take the focus off teachings and use the cross. That's why he doesn't have any. But they each have added teachings. Some of the teachings they have taken from the same Q source. And just as we tell our students, don't plagiarize, don't copy from each other from the same source, that is the answer to how Matthew and Luke have verbatim teachings. They copied them from Q word for word. Now with that, I'm going to bring this to a close with my great hope that you can use these source books to find other things to make this course very rich for your students. We in the department, if we're around, we will help you with anything we can.
Hello, I'm Craig Paulo, and I'm the liaison for philosophy to the Center for Lifelong Learning. And I don't want to make this a burden for you during your orientation, but we do want you to understand how the philosophy department wishes to approach teaching philosophy. And let me first introduce the faculty. The leader of the program is Robert Cluis, who is an outstanding scholar. He's a doctoral graduate from Boston College, and he's written authoritatively on the topic of Kant's aesthetics that was recently published by the University of Cambridge. The other core member of the faculty is Professor Patrick Messina, who is a recent doctoral graduate from the Pontifical Athenaeum of St. Anselm in Rome. I'm merely an adjunct here, along with my wife, Catherine. And Catherine has a master's degree from Villanova University, and her area is Marsilio Ficino. And myself, my doctorate is from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, and I write on St. Augustine and his influence on Western thought, and particularly on the phenomenology of Heidegger. So for a very small program in a pretty small college, I think we have a rather distinguished faculty. The next thing I'd like to talk about is our approach to the teaching of philosophy. And for us, this is of particular significance. Number one, we have an historical approach to teaching all of our courses, and especially the signature course, the Ethics 2000. So we always begin with the Greeks and go to the influence and the impact of Christianity on Western philosophy through the Middle Ages, modern and contemporary thinkers in that way. And secondly is this idea that we have a philosophia perennis, that there is a perennial philosophy that begins in the Greeks and that continues to this day. And thirdly would be the emphasis on primary works. So none of us in the faculty use any edited anthology that has excerpted works. We all try to read works in their entirety. So if we're reading Plato's Republic, we try to read the whole Republic. If that's not possible, we read the whole of books 1, 2, and 3, the whole of books 7 and 8. So the emphasis is on the text and the idea that the ideas that students are gaining, that they're themselves going through a philosophical and philological archaeology. They're getting ideas from texts. The fourth emphasis in our approach would be the Catholic tradition. And this, first and foremost, emphasizes the compatibility of faith and reason, which is very important in our department that belongs to a Catholic college. And another emphasis that we have is the development of one's worldview. So we hope that students will walk away, understanding that the Western Judeo-Christian worldview is a venerable tradition and that they are a part of it. And we hope that this ethics course is not really simply teaching answers, but giving them a good approach to asking questions, how to ask great questions, how to ask the right questions, and also how to grow as an ethical agent, as a person. So with these four principles, let me just say again, the historical approach is very important. However you plan to do your own syllabus, be sure that it goes from the Greeks and to the contemporary thinkers, with a great emphasis on Plato and Aristotle, on Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, for instance. And secondly, showing the student that you can connect the dots, so to speak, that you can move from Plato to Aristotle, to Augustine, to Thomas Aquinas, to Hegel, to Kant, to Heidegger, etc. And that all these things are giving us what is the tradition that we abide by. And thirdly, that ideas come from reading great books. So they're not only learning ethical thinking, but they're also gaining an introduction to these great books. And they're gaining an introduction to how to read these great books. And this is of significance to us, and giving them exposure to these great books and this great tradition is very important to us. And fourthly, as I said, is the Catholic tradition. And the most significant aspect of this, again, is that faith and reason are compatible. Now, concerning the signature course itself, the Ethics 2000, as I said, number one in your syllabus, it's got to go from the Greeks, and it should involve Christian philosophy. So Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. Some of us don't even go beyond St. Thomas Aquinas. So at the very least, it has to go from the Greeks to the 14th century. Secondly, is the development in any signature course, and particularly for philosophy, of critical analysis skills. And this is very important. It's very important at Gwynedd-Mercy. It's very important at any college in the United States today. So teaching students how to read well, how to read critically, how to read like philosophers, and therefore also emphasizing the idea of breaking down argument in these texts. And of course, then using all of this to help in writing. The signature course, the Philosophy 2000, is a writing intensive course. So whatever assignment that you give, and the department leaves that largely up to you. There has to be either a term paper, which few of us do, or another example might be, and I have done this on occasion, would be to allow the student to write 3 papers, and then I take the highest grade of the 3. So conceivably a student could fail the first paper, get a C on the second paper, and perhaps a B+ on the final paper, and I would take the B+ or an 89, let us say, to be the grade for the writing section of the course. We leave that up to you, but the emphasis is on writing. There has to be some writing element. I also do a textual analysis paper, and I know Professor Messina does the same, and my wife also. In a textual analysis paper, you would be reinforcing everything that the course is about. And it's a small paper, 4 or 5 pages. And I tell the student that begin in a traditional manner. Aristotle says that any good writing has an introduction, it has body, it has a conclusion. So that in the introduction, there should be a thesis statement. And in the thesis statement, let us say there are 3 points. And in each of those points, you know, the first point is developed in the second paragraph, the second point is developed in the third paragraph, etc. And that the entire paper is founded on 1 or 2 block quotes that are taken directly from whichever primary source they prefer. Let's say Plato's Republic. And let's say they're interested in the equality of women. And so they go to book 5. And so they take a passage, let's say anywhere from 6 to 11 lines, and they're going to analyze those lines. So the instructor has to also guide the student in, you know, helping the student to find, you might say, lines that are rich in concepts, so that the student can analyze those 5, 6, 7, 11 lines and derive significant concepts and show how important these ideas are and what's the relationship between concepts in those passages. And at the same time, using other passages and lines throughout the text, maybe throughout the whole of the Republic, to support their analysis in this particular paper. So I emphasize, you know, focusing on the text, which they have already done through our reading. They're doing it now again in focusing their papers on this topic. And then if you do the 3-paper option, they have the ability to revise. And anybody knows that good writing is hard to come by. Plato says we have to work like slaves in order to do the good. And so, you know, to give the student the ability to revise, that's where it is. And our faculty would encourage that. So all of this is not only an introduction to ethics and to ethical thinking, and more importantly, ethical questioning, but it's also the only introduction that the philosophy program has at Gwynedd-Mercy College. So we're kind of using the ethics course also as an introduction to Western philosophy itself and to Western ideas that we hope will inflame the student's heart and mind with learning and excitement over these great ideas. Because ultimately, no matter how stimulating or exciting or fascinating we might be, what's more stimulating and exciting are the ideas themselves. So, good luck to you. I wish you well. As I say, I'm the liaison. If there's anything at all that I can do for you, please contact me. Good luck. Thank you.